Would now like to introduce today's presenters. Hajar El-Hamoumi, Senior Consultant at Wavestone, specializes in cybersecurity and digital trust. In this role, she assists companies build their information security function and design business-centric cybersecurity roadmaps, including budgeting and governance evolution. Amy Fong, Vice President, is a member of Everest Group's sourcing and vendor management practice. In this role, she advises enterprises on maximizing value from strategic provider relationships in outsourced services categories. Abhishek Singh, partner, leads the cloud transformation research for Everest Group. As a partner with the firm, Abhishek is responsible for growth, client relationships, and thought leadership in North America. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Amy.
Thank you so much and welcome everyone. We appreciate you joining us today. And this is a really interesting topic we're going to cover. We'll start in today's session by talking a bit about the current state of third-party risk management. And then we'll talk about strategies to mitigate cybersecurity risk. And then we'll go through a few places to start. This can be an overwhelming topic, so we want to give you some tips. So if we start by looking at the matter of third-party management, it's quite complex. My background is in supply chain and supplier management. There is a very complex network of players in our supply base right now, as well as looking through end-to-end supply chain. And third-party risk management has become more and more important. We see only about 18% of companies have really a comprehensive inventory of third parties that they share sensitive and confidential information with. That is obviously a challenge. You would want to have that close to 100%. So there's a big gap there. There's also a couple $1 million a year spent by a typical company on vetting third parties. And we'll talk about how effective that is in just a moment. We also see about 60% of security breaches last year were caused directly or indirectly by third parties. So when we're concerned about cybersecurity and information security, we really need to be looking at not just internal to the business, but we need to be looking at our third-party partners and all of the types of information that they touch. I'm going to turn it to Abhishek so he can talk a little bit about some of the various challenges we've seen recently in the market.
Thank you, Amy. And in speaking about this topic of third parties, one caveat here is that we don't want to be talking about third parties just from the perspective of the risks that they bring in, but we definitely need to understand and appreciate the different vulnerabilities that you get exposed to when working with third parties, and understanding that preparing for that is all about what we are going to talk about today. But just to set the context in terms of to what extent is business viability, business continuity, and service continuity gets impacted in terms of working with third parties, what are the different scenarios. The slide in front of you kind of takes you through some of the major scenarios that we have seen play out in the last few years. So whether it's organizations that you're working with getting into financial trouble, kind of impairing their ability to service you in the areas that you are dependent on them. That could be one. Consolidation. Two large vendors you are working with consolidating together increases their ability to negotiate, having a much more market power compared to others. So you need to be watchful of that. And then there are many others, and I won't be diving deep in each one of them, but the point being here that whether it's issues related to business environment, natural or man-made disasters, all of these are aspects that you need to prepare for. But today here we are talking about, or going to talk about more about the cybersecurity vulnerability aspect of working with third parties. So before we even dive into that, Amy, would you want to talk about the broader risk considerations for enterprises before we even start talking about cyber?
Yeah, and risk management is a really important part of managing suppliers or working with any kind of third party. often it falls in the ownership of the sourcing and procurement team. Other times it's other parts of the organization. But there's really been an increased focus on this, I would say, in the last 10 years, with even heightened awareness in the last 18 months as we were all caught off guard with changes in the supply chain that affected almost every business. But we expect that enterprises need to be monitoring a lot of different risk parameters on an ongoing basis. So understanding your supply-based risk, location risk, supplier risk, I view those as two different things. And looking at factors like geopolitical risk and macroeconomic risk, safety, security, government support, or legal and regulatory risks. And then at an operational level, understanding risks that might be driven by market dynamics. And we're actually facing a lot of this right now as we look at cost inflation and talent availability. And infrastructure was one that we became quite aware of in the last year as availability and talent shifted to a work from home model. So really understanding and having a broad and comprehensive risk program in place for your supply base is incredibly important. For outsourcing, which is what we're going to mainly focus on, today we talk about doing that at both the deal level, the supplier level, and the broader geo level, location level. So that this all fits into that. I think cybersecurity is one that has become increased risk over time as we've increased our our technological connections with our providers and the data that we share, but also more of a visible risk as some of those headlines we talked about have hit the news.
Indeed, and thank you for setting the context here, because even when you look at this particular slide, for a moment, just spend a few seconds looking at the bottom left hand of the picture in front of you, as the timestamp on these incidences indicate that cyber vulnerabilities through third-party endpoints is not something which is a recent phenomenon. This has been happening for a while now. And enterprises need to understand this as a risk and put in measures, I would say proactive measures, structures, legal frameworks, etc., in order to mitigate some of these aspects. And mitigation can only happen if you are anticipating those. And in many ways, if you look at this data point of 60% of security breaches happening either directly or indirectly via third parties, is an important data point here, because that lends itself to the importance of preparing for third-party risk vulnerabilities. And the question here is, or the big aspect here is that it's not something that is just your responsibility. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, even regulators have kind of caught up onto it. Each of these related regulations that you see have elements wherein they are talking about introducing provisions so that you take care of third-party risk elements also. Now, looking at all of this data, the question in your mind probably is, what is the extent of this third-party vulnerability? That's where we'll move into the next slide. If you look at this picture here, and we as a research firm have spent enough time analyzing and looking at different aspects of any enterprise's security operations, any area you pick here, whether it's identity and access management, going down to application and cloud security, chances are you are dealing with third parties from a small to a large extent. But as the extent of outsourcing picture that you see right in front of you, it's a fairly exposed portfolio that we see in the enterprises that we work with. You can call them exposure points, you can call them vulnerability points, but at the end of the day, these are the experts who are bringing in the right kind of capabilities for you to deal with all of the elements of security operations that we are talking about. So the point of this slide is that if you do not have a risk mitigation plan embedded in third-party contracting, you are exposed because you are going to deal with vulnerabilities related to each of these areas, whether it's network and endpoint security, cloud security, or application security. So that's why, Amy, I have a question for you. Are enterprises really investing efforts into risk mitigation? If so, in what areas and how?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've done a bit of research. We did a recent Pinnacle study on strategic supplier management. I've done a lot of risk management research on the sourcing space in my last decade in this industry. And certainly more and more is getting invested into that. No question that there's more people being put on this and more effort and more PowerPoint slides being created. Whether it's effective, I think, is still a question. And one of the most recent questions that we asked in our most recent Pinnacle was how often you are checking your suppliers or conducting risk assessments. And this really spans all types of providers, meaning, or all types of risk, meaning we're checking for, a lot of different factors, a whole checklist of things that almost always include some kind of, InfoSec type risk check as well. Majority of people are doing this either at the time of onboarding or they're doing it on an ongoing basis. Well, maybe not the majority, because this is a check all that apply, right? So, but many people are doing that. What we don't see though, when we looked at the diving into this data, is the combination of all of this. So if you're checking your risk when you bring on a supplier and then annually, that's not what I would consider sufficient. What we consider best practice is really to be checking new supplier risk, checking on an ongoing basis, and then when something happens in a trigger-wise change in the supplier status or an outside change, COVID is a great example. There's a lot of risk assessment happening last March and April, and then on a regular basis, ideally quarterly. And we'll talk a little bit more about other times when you should be checking your suppliers. We'll talk about Hajar will cover that in just a moment. We also find that about 78% of strategic suppliers tend to be covered with some kind of risk mitigation plan. So there is definitely a lot of effort going into this. When we look at the ROI from some of the third parties who have assessed that, it's not necessarily as strong as you would like. Certainly a lot of hours, but 65% are saying that the processes are not necessarily very effective. They're somewhat or not effective. And only around 8% of these assessments result in some kind of action. So there's a lot of checking without a lot of results coming out of it. And I think that's a gap that we see right now across the board for a lot of different types of risk. So let's get a bit deeper today and talk about some of the strategies to mitigate cybersecurity risk. Hajar, you and the Wavestone team spend a lot of time dealing with cybersecurity, talking about it, all types of cybersecurity. So can you start us off a bit more on how you view that, how you look at it?
Yes, sure. So based on the different elements that you shared, Amy, or that Abhishek shared as well, it's obvious that third-party risk management is not a new topic. However, the rising of the cyber attacks, whether it's data breaches or other cyber attacks that are really common from the third parties, have been really booming in the last decades. And also based on the different figures that you shared that are really interesting ones, we see that obviously the different strategies and different programs that today are in place are not efficient enough. So it's really essential to readjust and review the third-party management lifecycle that has been historically managed by purchasing, and to rethink it in order to make sure that we are including and that we are really involving cybersecurity SMEs in every and each step of the process. So here you will find basically a simplified third-party management lifecycle. If we go from the before and during the contracting, it's really essential today to make sure that on all the different contracts that you are going to have with your suppliers, with your providers, with your vendors, that you are including in there some security clauses that needs to be enforced and that needs to be in place during the whole term of the contract. It's also important to do a due diligence of the different vendors and partners that you are going to be working with in order not to induce a new attack vector to your information system or to your company, generally speaking. But even if we see that based on the different metrics that Amy shared in the slide before, that most of the organizations and companies today are really putting the effort in this first step, it's really important as well to make sure that during the running of the services and during the term of the contract, that this third-party management and this third-party security posture is really monitored on a regular basis. And unfortunately, we can see with our clients and we see in the market that usually this step is usually and often overlooked. Then there is also the third part of the life cycle, which is a critical one, which is the contract closure. Contract closure is really important to be handled in a very detailed way, and having like the different security teams that are also involved in order to make sure that the offboarding of the different vendors is done appropriately, and that we are not like whether being non-compliant to some regulatory requirements. And here it's more when it's kind of including and involving data that is regulatory noticed, or also in order to make sure that the different interconnections that you have between your information system and the information system of the provider or the third party is properly revoked. So in the coming slides, we are going to deep dive a little bit more in the each one of those steps. But now the question that we are going to be like facing is organizations are having hundreds of thousands of vendors, of suppliers, of contractors. So how is it possible to have a program of third-party management program that is efficient, that is pragmatic, but that is also scalable? The answer to this is that all the suppliers aren't equally important. And therefore, we need to adapt like the approach that we are adapting and following with the different suppliers based on the criticality. So step 0, I would say, is to have a clear inventory of the different suppliers that you have, the different vendors, and more importantly, is to assess the criticality of those vendors. How to assess this criticality based on the cyber risks that they can represent for the organization, meaning the access to the system, to the data, to the premises that they are going to have, the likelihood and the impact of those risks, what is the level of the cyber risk that this third party is going to have on your organization, the type of exposure. Is it a service that is publicly exposed? Is it more a service that is really within the organization softwares that you are using? Because it's really like different threats that we are going to be discussing in here. And last but not least is the business criticality that this vendor is having for your organization, generally speaking. Because the first place, if you are contracting with a third party that is going to be serving a specific rule and a specific service for the organization. So all those criteria will enable you to kind of categorize the different vendors and make sure that you are having the right criticality that is mapped to them. And at the end, when we do this exercise with our clients, we kind of witness, generally speaking, the third parties that are really highly critical are about 1.5%, whereas we are going to have 10 to 30% that are pretty like medium criticality, meaning that they are still important for the organization and they can have some significant impact, whether on the business or significant impact from a cybersecurity perspective, but they are not supporting critical information or critical business. And we are going to find that the vast majority, from 60 to 80%, that are pretty in this low bottom, that are not critical. So therefore, once we are having this kind of inventory of the different vendors, we can adopt and we can see what are the different security controls that needs to be implemented based on this criticality, and to what depth we need to go in order to make sure that we are having the right follow-up and the right monitoring of those security risks, but also the business risks that are related to the third parties. So this is, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's so important. One of the challenges I see on the sourcing side is the time to onboard a supplier. And I've had this conversation with many companies where, you know, not every supplier needs to go through the same onboarding process and the same risk checks. And you really need to be selective. There are certainly, you know, that 1 to 5% and maybe up to 30% that need some level of additional, you know, checks. And that's what we're talking about today. But you really also need to be screening for the 60 to 80% that aren't touching your information. And, you know, you don't need the same speed bumps in the onboarding process with those suppliers. I think getting this right and understanding where the risk is really half the battle for a lot of organizations today, because we all have the, you know, we've seen the headlines, right? We want to protect everything, and you can put too many processes in as well and slow down the value.
Yeah, completely. And this echoes the first figure that you presented, that today only 18% of the organization have a clear inventory of the most critical third parties that they are having.
Exactly. So we're going to take a quick poll right now. We'll open this up. What we would like to know is for which of the life cycle steps that Hajar mentioned, you have a process to assess and manage risk and ideally mitigate risk. But let's just say any risk management process right now. So is it before and during contracting, throughout the ongoing relationship, or at the end of the relationship? You can select all of these if that applies. Really interested to see how these numbers play out. And I think we have about half of you have replied so far, so we'll give you another 30 seconds or so to put in your vote. All right, getting closer. I love that I can see sort of the moving poll, and it's going pretty much as I would have guessed, having been in this space for a while. We can go ahead and close it now. But what we're seeing, and this should pop up for all of you in just a moment, is that most of you, 91%, do something up front during the contracting process. From an ongoing relationship standpoint, again, most of you, 64% of those of you who responded, do have some kind of risk management. At the end of relationship, that's only 27%. I think that's pretty typical to what I've seen. A lot of people forget that when they've left a supplier, there's possibly even more risk at the end of the relationship than there was during. So Hajar and Abhishek are going to talk through these various stages and what you can do at different stages. I'm interested to see that, because I think there's probably something we can learn from at each one of these stages on how we can better, you know, assess suppliers, put mitigation plans in place, and ongoing monitoring.
In fact, thanks to both you, Amy, and Hazard for kind of laying the context out here in terms of how enterprises should be going about the risk management process. And even the poll results kind of show that there is, in general, awareness and agreement in this group, at least, that things have to be done upfront. Because primarily the reason here is that the entities out there trying to poke holes into your cybersecurity management processes are not sitting idle. They are evolving very fast. And we have seen the kind of complex and credible threats out there, how they have evolved in the last years. And hence, organizations have to keep up in their risk management process to be able to audit what's out there and plan for it accordingly. Hence, if you look at this entire process of building out a risk management process before and during contract negotiation involves many aspects, whether it is talking about assessing the third-party cybersecurity level or integrating cybersecurity into RFPs, even the requirements that you would chart out in contracts. Now, these can be legal terms, but as I was talking through, I mean, some of these tenets are evolving so fast that even the contractual language, the terms and terminologies, the outcome parameters on which you need to sit in agreement with your third party have also do need to evolve too. And unless and until both parties agree and there are metrics that can be measured, it will be very difficult for you to actually track that and be in lockstep with what's really happening out there. So that's the most important aspect of how you really need to go about it. So with this as the context, the question I have for you is that how would you recommend enterprises who are going ahead and doing some of this contract negotiation, risk management process? How should they go about following through that process of risk assessment?
That's a great question. So there are different ways that you can assess and monitor the cybersecurity level of the third party, especially at the very beginning, at the first step. So there are some, I would say, aspects that are technical and other ones that are more maturity oriented. So if we go to the technical assessment, there are the penetration tests. So the penetration tests, the aim is really to identify the different vulnerabilities that the third party can have and try to exploit that, meaning like being in the shoes of an attacker. So how we can really like exploit the third party management and eventually also impact your information system. This is what we call the ethical hacking. This is one of the assessment that can be done. There is also the technical audit. So the aim of the technical audit is really evaluating the security level of the third party through doing some in-depth analysis of their architecture, of their tools that they are using, of the configuration that they have, which means that you need to have access to the information system, or at least to the portion of the information system that is going to serve the services that you are going to contract with your third party. Then the third family, I would say, of technical assessment is vulnerability scans. And vulnerability scans usually are automated, where you can leverage some tools that enable to scan the different assets and identify the different known vulnerabilities that are in the market. So this family of technical assessments, as you can see, are pretty intrusive for the third parties, and they need to have a consent from the third parties so that you can really apply them and to run them. Also, you need to keep in mind that those technical assessments are pretty costly. So they're not assessment that you can do for all your different suppliers or all the different softwares. Getting back to the point that you need really to categorize the different third parties and to make sure that you are putting the right assessment to the right measures according to the criticality of the vendor. On the other hand, we have the maturity assessment. So maturity assessments are more related to conducting some security questionnaires. And here there is different security questionnaires that I've seen our clients and that I've seen in the market. Some of them are pretty homemade, where they are going to put the focus on a specific area depending whether on the field or whether on the industry. Other ones are going to be more based on some security frameworks that are also touching upon the third-party risk management, like the SIG, for example, like the NIST framework, the ISO 27001, the ISO 27002. So those are security questionnaires that are going to be submitted to the different vendors and that they need to fill in order to have a first idea about the security level that they have. Second thing also that is that's enabled to have some insight about the third-party cybersecurity level is the type of certifications that those vendors are having. Do they have ISO 27001 certification, for example? If yes, for what portion of the information system? Is it the portion that is going to be used for the services of for the organization, or another one? Do they have the SOC 2 type 2, for example? So those questions will enable to have at least a first understanding of the how the cybersecurity is taken into consideration by the vendor or by the supplier. And the third point, which is the cyber assessment platforms. So lately in the last decade, we've seen like multiple new cybersecurity companies that are really providing and offering the service of cyber rating, the different companies. And that's enabled to have a first level of understanding of the security level and the security maturity of the third parties. That can be really like a signal to say whether we are going to be open to work with this vendor or not. That being said, of course, those different assessments are in their limitations. Here we are going more to focus on the cyber rating agencies. There are two major types, I would say, of cyber rating agencies. This first family that we are having in here are providing evaluations that are technical, that are automated, but only analyzing the surface. So how does it work? Basically, those different cyber rating agencies are going to use a combination of data points that are going to be provided or that are going to be taken, whether like from the public, meaning like the dark and public web, the open source, or that they are going to be purchased from public or private sources. Then they are going to articulate those different data points that they are going to collect for a specific vendor and run their proprietary algorithm, and based on the machine learning, depending on the different on the different algorithms and tools that are used by those cyber rating, to calculate at the very end a global rating for the organization. They are going to say, oh, this organization is A, B, or C, and then they are going to give a little bit more insights about the sub ratings. So it's kind of similar, and it has been inspired by the creative rating that is in the market for decades now. Here we are just given some names of cyber rating agencies, names that we've seen within our clients or that we've seen in the market. I just want to remind everyone that we are vendor agnostic, so we are not endorsing any one of those vendors. We just wanted to give you like some examples of those cyber rating agencies. So this is the first family. The second family is pretty the same rationale, but it's just like the way or the approach that they are having is different. So those specific platform, assessment platform, are going to be more governance oriented, and they are going to perform a light deep analysis, meaning that they are going to interact with the organization that they are going to assess. So it's not a completely automated process. It's pretty semi-manual, where they are going to have like some security checks that are going to be done, some security questionnaires that are going to be filled by the organization, and they are going to have their own analyst team going through those different results in order to give the basically the ranking of the organization itself. And I would say the major benefits of those assessments platform is that they are kind of consolidating the weights of the different companies. So, for example, for big companies that are kind of managing multiple partnership with different customers or different clients, once they are going through the process for once, their score is going to be available for all the other organizations that are going to ask for getting their score. So that they are also being a little bit more efficient and more pragmatic in the way that they are showcasing their level of cybersecurity and the level of maturity. Once again, here are a couple of examples of companies that are providing this service among other. Since that we are going to share with you the slide deck, you can have like a closer look to it. Now, once we've contracted with our supplier, we've selected it, we've done our due diligence, we are running the service. It's really important to keep a close monitoring of the different vendors that you are having, and more specifically, the ones that are critical. How we are going to do this? Two main things. First one is reporting and record keeping. I'm going back once again to the fact that it's really important to maintain an updated list and inventory of your third parties and your different suppliers. And it's also important to have someone who is assigned to those critical providers in order to be able to kind of monitor and follow up the different evolvements and the different changes that those providers can have throughout the duration of the contract or throughout the duration of the service. Because sometimes the situation at the signature of the contracts can really be different from the situation during the contract. So this is the first important thing. And in order to be efficient and in order also to be scalable, it's really important to use and to leverage some tools that will automate and also enable the steering of those different third parties. And here there are some JRC tools that can be repurposed for this effect. And the second thing is doing security reviews, scheduled periodic security reviews. How you can do this? There are different things. Whether you are going to include basically the third-party management scope within your information system. I usually tell my clients for those critical service provider with whom you have strong interconnections, with whom you have your information systems are pretty linked, you need to consider them as part of your information system, is what I usually call the extended information system. And therefore, that means that all the different security policies that you are implying or that you are applying in-house need also to be applied and enforced on those segments of the information system of your third parties. That means that the different policies, the different tools, the monitoring that you are having for your information system needs to be inclusive of the vendors that you are interconnected with. And second thing, it's more like establishing a really solid governance in order to be able to follow up the different security assurance plans that you have, in order to be able to have some meaningful dashboards with some clear KPIs that have been defined in the contracting, and also still do from time to time some assessments thanks to the different external platforms like the ones that we've presented just before. Now, if we go to the next slide, where we are going to be highlighting a little bit more, I would say some of the tools that can be used for the real-time control. So we have here like a selection of tools there. Once again, we are not being comprehensive. We are just focusing on those tools. There are many others in the market. Those tools are going to enable to have real-time control on the different products. And here we are more oriented towards the product or towards the software. The main characteristics of those tools, first of all, they are technical. Second thing, they are automated. And the third point is they are being really like narrow focused. Like, for example, the software confidence audits, like from multiple discussions that I had with my clients, usually one of the things they are struggling with is saying, oh, we have multiple softwares. We've did our due diligence at the very beginning, but now that we are having them in our system, they are in there. And we are not sure that we are really like closely following up on the security level. So here is an example of a French startup that was founded in 2019 that enables to really provide some security assessment and analysis and tests of third-party softwares that you are using, whether your information system or within your organization. And that's enabled to deliver some analytics and also some automated remediation reports in order to improve the overall security posture. So those kind of tools, it's just one amongst many others, enable to, first of all, have a good visibility on the software that you are using. And second thing is also to give you some remediation actions that you can really deploy in order to enhance the overall security posture. This solution is not only focused on third-party risk management, but I've been like involved in some projects where this solution has been selected to this effect and really to be used for the third-party risk management. Then we have the second one. Sorry if we can just go, yeah, thank you. So the file analysis in the sandbox. So those, back to my point saying that leverage the different tools that you have in your information system to also cover the third-party systems that you are whether using or that you are interconnected with. And it goes like the anti-malware analysis that you have. If you have a SIEM, for example, make sure that the SIEM is also collecting the right logs, collecting the right information and data from the third-party information system. Can you use as well the different sandboxes in order to make sure that you have the right, I would say, understanding and once again the right visibility on the level of security of the third parties that you are using in your information system. So this is for the second step, which is the monitoring and during the service or during the contract. Now, if we go to the last but not least,
I want to just clarify one question we got was the little smiley faces next to the
yes,
the tools you mentioned, and you may have mentioned this and I missed it, but can you just clarify for the audience?
Yes, sure. So, so the smile is that we've put in there. It's related to the really good feedbacks that we had from some of our clients regarding those specific tools. This is why we just added the little smiley saying that we've got like great feedback on those.
That's helpful to
them. So back to the contract closer. So this is the last step, and that, as Amy, you mentioned at the very beginning, really often, too many often, we see that the contract closer is not appropriately managed, especially with the third parties. We see, okay, the contract has arrived to its due dates, we are all good, and we just move on. But it's really important and it's really critical to develop and to put in place a very thorough process in order to make sure that we are not having any risks that are related to the termination of the contract with the third-party management. And this for, first of all, for regulatory reasons, as Abhishek mentioned, now the regulatories are becoming more and more regarding the third-party risk management, more and more strict about the privacy, about the protection of the data. So it's really important to make sure that you have a clear checklist of what needs to be done while terminating a contract with a third party, and how to make sure that all the data that they have, for example, has been properly removed from all the information systems, get the right sign-offs from the third parties that it has been done in an appropriate way, and being compliant with the different regulations that are applying to your industry and to your business. So this is from data perspective. Second thing, it's more for the third parties with whom you have like a strong interconnection with your information system. Make sure that the accesses that those third parties, contractors or providers are having have been revoked. Make sure that you, whether security audits or technical means, that all the different flows that you have between the two, your organization and the third party, have been shut down in the appropriate way. And then make sure as well that all the reversibility clauses that you have within your contract have been respected and have been enforced in the right way, so that you can have a kind of end-to-end life cycle that enable you to make sure that the risk related to the third party has been managed from the very beginning, before even the contracting, from the selection phases until the very end, the closure of the service and the termination of the contract. So this was kind of in a nutshell the main, I would say, best practices and the main points that need to be taken into consideration in order to be able to cover the different security risks. And now I believe that I'm going to hand it back over to you, Amy, so that you can give us a little bit more details on how we can go more in depth.
Thank you. Thanks, Hajar. And we have some great questions. I'm going to get to those in just a minute. As a next step, as you can tell, the Wavestone team, the Everest Group team, we are partners. We have a lot of great expertise on this call and in our analyst teams and our consulting teams on cybersecurity. We did want to offer an opportunity to see a little bit more of our research, have a conversation with our subject matter experts. And there's a poll that's popping up right now, this offer, if you're interested in it. If you do select this, we have a peak matrix, and I'll let Abhishek show our peak matrix in just a moment, on IT managed security services. It's a fairly thorough report. This is how Everest Group ranks and rates service providers. We will share that report with you, as well as a 30-minute conversation with some of our analyst team. To set that up and to tee up your interest, we ask that you pick one of these 5 topical areas. It'll just help us come prepared and have a conversation that's hopefully high value to you. So if you have a lot of questions and feel like this has brought up more concerns and questions than answers, we certainly want to make sure we help you double click into some of what we've discussed here. The poll is open, and you can go ahead and click that if you're interested in having a conversation. The next thing we'll do is move on to questions. So if you do have a question, please submit it in the Q&A panel on Zoom. And I'm going to start out with, we've got some really good questions, actually. Comments on thoughts around including a physical security analysis in the technical assessment. We haven't talked a lot about physical, and I think that's obviously a costly but important thing to think about. So Hajar or Abhishek, I'll turn that out to either of you.
Maybe maybe I can start, Abhishek, and then I'll hand it back to you. So it's something that's we usually see it's included when it's more like the outsourcing to the data centers or things like this, where physical security is also like a really important things. And sometimes I've been like in projects where the physical security has been also included in the technical assessment. Maybe Abhishek, on your end?
Yeah, indeed. This has been one of the aspects. So I'll first add a nuance to it and then talk about the physical security aspect, since I end up focusing inordinate amount of time on the cloud security aspect because that's the mandate I run here at Everest Group. Physical security there is becoming less and less of a priority because in many ways in the contracting that happens for cloud security, it's kind of assumed, at least from a perspective of data centers and other physical locations where data resides. But we are talking about enterprises here who have a varied mix of security needs. And when they are engaging with a third-party vendor, physical security aspect, whether it's in relation to where the data resides, where they have some of their most important installations, and it could go beyond the cyber aspect of it. And that's probably what the question alludes to. That also is an important aspect, but as you were alluding to, depends on the nature of the contract that you're signing with. If a vendor is going to take care of certain physical locations, that's what you are outsourcing, that is part of the contract, it makes sense to have the physical security aspect built into it. Interestingly, at least with the vendors who we have worked with, who typically focus on the cyber and data side of things, we haven't really seen them bring out the physical security aspect as much because they tend to deal with the softer side of things. But definitely, if you are in those situations, we'll be happy to provide you more insights if you have opted for that conversation. Yeah.
And another question here. Thank you both. That's great feedback, I think, and insights. Any recommendations on security KPIs to be tracked with your providers?
This is a great question and a tricky question. Identifying the right KPIs is always a complex matter, especially like KPIs that are really meaningful. So depending once again of the type of the provider that you are having, the level of criticality that you are having, you need to adjust the KPIs. Sometimes you are going to have that the main, I would say, the main stake for you is the confidentiality. So we are going to have some KPIs related to how often they are doing some security audits in order to ensure that they are using the right mechanisms to ensure the confidentiality of the data within their premises. You are going to have some KPIs that are related to the number of people on their side accessing the systems. For other providers, the most important thing to have in mind is the availability. So you are going to be monitoring more KPIs that are related to the availability of the service, the number of service breakdown or the service disturbance. So depending on the type of provider and the type of third party that you are dealing with, dependent also about the main security stakes that you want to have with this provider, you are going to define the KPIs. And of course, they are going to have some KPIs that are related to the different SLAs that you have with those providers that need also to be monitored.
Thank you. That was a very helpful response. One last question, and we'll just try to keep a quick, short response on this, but always happy to have a further conversation later. But how would you measure the success of a risk management program? How do you define the ROI? And I know this is very difficult to define an ROI for something like risk. Risk benefits of risk management are always hard to measure, but any thoughts on where you would even start?
So Amy, you kept the most difficult
I
question
know,
till
I
the
know.
end that you needed to have.
And I gave it to you, not myself. So.
I was really happy to have a discussion around this topic. It's really difficult to have like the definition of the ROI and how you can measure it. It's one of the trickiest things to really like follow and to really monitor. Once again, it will depends on the different tools that you have implemented and the different efforts that have been in place and the results that you are going to get. So, for example, if you feel that once you've deployed a specific tool or JRC tool to have the inventory and that you are now feeling that you are having in mind 90% of all the vendors that are listed, that means that your investment somehow really really paid. If you are deploying or like if you are restructuring the program, but you still feel that you are lacking and you have some big gaps in the different steps, I would say, that means that there is still something in there that is not going completely well. So it's really difficult to have like some absolute measurement of the success of the risk management program, but I'll be really happy to have like a more detailed conversation on this topic.
It's a tough one for 2 minutes, I know. I'm sure, but I thought it was worth throwing out there because
Sure.
I think virtually everyone faces that when they're putting resources towards something, right? So we want to wrap up and we have just a couple minutes left just to kind of let you know how we can support you between Wavestone and Everest Group. First of all, Everest Group does, we're a research firm. We're focused on the global services industry. We do quite a bit of monitoring of service providers. These are the aspects of the top 25 or so service providers that we monitor. We have an Everest Group market intelligence tool that provides ratings on governance, financial, operational, and reputational risk on a quarterly basis. And that's available to our outsourcing excellence members in our programs. Abhishek, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the peak matrix that we do, since we mentioned that a moment ago.
Yeah, indeed. For those folks who have opted for the 30-minute conversation and access to this report, just giving you a peek preview of what we've been doing. Now, while this is a vendor analysis, we have a team that exclusively focuses on security services and cybersecurity and deep expertise across the areas that we discussed today. What we do specifically as part of our vendor assessments, which you see right in front of you, is looking at all aspects of the security offerings that these players, and a lot of those who are not even mentioned because they could not qualify for the assessment itself. We study them from the perspective of offerings, what buyers are telling about them. So we get into primary conversations around, hey, how they have been dealing with security services, what kind of vulnerabilities we have seen, how they are managing relationships. So managed security services in many ways is the way large enterprises think about orchestrating a lot of their security portfolio elements. So happy to have a conversation on this, and you can get an access to it. Back to you, Amy.
Thanks. And finally, Wavestone, who is our Everest Group consulting partner, I'm going to give Hajar a chance to talk a little bit about what she does with her teams.
I was on mute. So sure, we have a cybersecurity and digital trust offer that goes beyond third-party security risk management. But here I'm just going more to be focusing on the different topics and items on third-party security risk management that we can help you with. So it goes really from the benchmark of third-party assessment tooling that you can implement and put in your information systems to how to help you develop and deploy an efficient and pragmatic security third-party risk management program and strategy with all the related policies. We can also help different different companies and organizations in the third-party due diligence that they are having, prioritization and inventory of the third parties and suppliers that they have. We can also, and we've supported many clients in the different steps of the life cycle that we've presented, whether like in the very first beginning that is related to the security clauses, the contracting, the security assurance plan, and privacy compliance. And also in the more later, I would say, stages like third-party security maturity assessment. And on that, we've helped multiple companies, as you can see in here. So I would be really pleased to have a discussion with you if you need any support on this.
All right, and with that, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you everyone so much for attending today. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you'd like to talk further. We love talking about this and having conversations about your specific challenges.
Thank you all.